Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the National Bar, to our friends, to our family, to our extended family. I'd like to welcome you to the fourth and final showcase, presidential showcase, today at this annual convention. This showcase is going to be absolutely fabulous, as the other showcases have been. And I first want to thank all of the people who worked tirelessly to make this conference a success. I really do, from the bottom of my heart. This showcase is entitled Diversity in Legislation: How Laws and Lawmakers Affect Black Communities. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are making history today at the National Bar Association. We have two of our members that are going to speak to us. First, you're going to hear in an interview that I had with the Assistant U.S. Attorney for Civil Rights, none other than Kristen Clark. And it's so amazing that Kristen Clark, the Honorable Kristen Clark, is a member of the National Bar Association, has been a fighter for social justice, for racial equality, fighting discrimination her entire career. Indeed, we saw her perform magnificently when she was being confirmed, and she's in her rightful place. So, ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves for a day that you will not forget, because as you know, we have some of the top leaders and lawmakers who are going to be on this panel. And we also, as a magnificent tribute to the power of the National Bar Association, we have one of our very own members, none other than the Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, who is going to speak to us. And this is historic for the National Bar Association, but indeed, it's historic for this country. So again, against that backdrop, enjoy the ride. We're going to have a lot of surprises and wonderful developments in the course of this showcase. But let's start with the interview that I had at the Justice Department with the Assistant U.S. Attorney for Civil Rights, Kristen Clark. Phenomenal honor for us to be here in the Justice Department, with you being the head of the Civil Rights Division. For many of us at the National Bar Association, indeed, all of our lawyers, we're so proud of you, we're so honored, we're so feel that it's been a blessing beyond blessings that you're heading this division. And we claim you as one of our stellar National Bar Association members. Can you share with our membership, with our friends and family, what the NBA has meant to you in your journey in getting to this place?
Well, first of all, it's always wonderful to get time to lift up the amazing work of the National Bar Association, one of our nation's most preeminent legal organizations. And I just want to thank you for the work that the NBA does each and every day to support Black lawyers, and the work that you do to promote justice. I am honored and humbled to have this opportunity to lead the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department, particularly given the moment that we are in. We know that we are at a moment where communities are calling for a reckoning when it comes to racism, are calling for a reckoning when it comes to unconstitutional policing, when it comes to the rise in hate. And the Civil Rights Division came about at a time in our country where these were the very issues that we were wrestling with. And so here we are in 2021 still contending with these issues. And I'm honored and humbled to be in a role where every day I get to use our own civil rights laws to promote accountability, to promote justice, to promote access to opportunity. And I look forward to finding ways to partner and collaborate with the NBA to advance this important work.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk about your recent litigation in Georgia. We're challenging the voter suppression laws. And as someone who lives in Atlanta and who lived through the Senate runoff election and also the presidential elections, and who saw firsthand voter suppression in Georgia, even though we fought through it, can you share with us the significance of that litigation for you here at the Justice Department and what you forecast throughout the nation as it relates to voter suppression?
You know, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is one of our nation's most important federal civil rights laws. This is a law that has done tremendous work to open up access to the ballot for Black people and other disenfranchised communities in our country over the last few decades. And so our Georgia lawsuit was brought using the Voting Rights Act. And I believe that we have got to do everything in our power to make sure that people have voice in our democracy and access to the ballot. And the Justice Department's role is to look at states and other jurisdictions that may be taking action that runs afoul of the Voting Rights Act or the National Voter Registration Act or the Help America Vote Act. Right, these are the laws that Congress gave us to use to ensure that Americans have voice in our democracy. And so this is an important part of our work, and an issue that you've heard Attorney General Garland speak about time and time again.
Well, first of all, we are delighted. We thank you for that litigation. The National Bar Association, every year we honor extraordinary people, extraordinary leaders who have done extraordinary things in this country and indeed the world. And I just want you to know, we believe that your contribution to the world, through the work that you've done leading up to this place, getting to this place in your life, and being in this position is so significant. Just know that the National Bar Association views you in that high esteem, and that because we have to do nonpartisan work, which we do in the voter suppression, election protection area, we are going to support wholeheartedly the efforts that you have undertaken here at the Justice Department to further nonpartisan election protection, protecting people's right to vote, which is sacrosanct in this country. And so I just want to ask you a final question. There are young girls, young women, and more seasoned women that look up to you. And so what can you say to the next generation of young women, young leaders who feel some kind of way when they look at voter suppression? What can you say?
So for the Black women and the Black girls out there who may be watching and who may have followed my journey here to the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department, you know, I've had to cross some valleys and climb some mountains to get here, and I think it's important to never be discouraged. And if there's one person out there who draws a little bit of inspiration from the path that I traveled to get here, then it will have been worth it. I deem it a blessing and a privilege to be a public servant, to be someone who gets to wake up every day to use the law to fight for justice, particularly for vulnerable communities across our country. I thank the National Bar Association for the work that they do every day to lift up the role that the law has played in promoting social justice in our country.
Thank you. Well, just as the 78th president of the National Bar Association, the 14th woman to serve as president of this robust and extraordinary organization, this is a historic moment. It's historic that you sit in this position at this time in history. It's historic that we're sitting in this room where J. Edgar Hoover did what he did. It's historic that I see a portrait of Frederick Douglass in the back. We can't see right here, but there's a portrait of Frederick Douglass and what that means. I see the portrait, the pictures of President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and our Attorney General. And at this historic moment in time, I just want to say thank you to you for giving us this opportunity to chat with you, to have what I call a fireside chat, to be able to share in this historic moment, which means so much to our members, to this country, and to the world. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it was such a treat for me to be at the Justice Department and to share that moment in time with the Assistant U.S. Attorney, Kristen Clark. And I hope that you enjoyed the interview, hearing from her firsthand, even though we were in COVID and we had to take appropriate precautions. She was so gracious as to allow us to come and visit and talk to her. And we are forever indebted to her. Well, this panel, ladies and gentlemen, Diversity in Legislation, How Laws and Lawmakers Affect Black Community. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to many and to present to some, our panelists for this magnificent discussion. First, I'd like to bring on the first Black woman minority leader designate in Florida history in the Florida House of Representatives, the Honorable Fentress Driscoll. This magnificent lawmaker in Florida has made a difference thus far. Her mere existence, her presence, her tenacity, her advocacy are so appreciated in Florida that she, in our humble impression, is going to be the first Black woman speaker of the Florida House of Representatives. Now, we are forecasting that, and we welcome you to the National Bar Association. And we understand in Florida, in this organization, Senator Arthenia Joyner, the second woman president of the National Bar Association. We understand how trailblazing she was, and we see and we thank you for also being trailblazing in the House of Representatives in Florida. Welcome to our panel. Next, I'd like to bring on a National Bar member who really needs very little introduction. I would submit that Yolanda Cass-Jackson, who's a shareholder at Becker and Poliakoff, is one of the most influential, impactful, and dynamic lobbyists / lawyers in the state of Florida. And that is maybe an underestimation of the impact that Yolanda Cass-Jackson has had in the state of Florida, advocating for the least of these, for communities, for cities, for just an incredible advocate. But ladies and gentlemen, Yolanda Cass-Jackson is an incredible member of the National Bar Association. She's been one of my very, very close advisors on legislative matters, on political matters. She helped us and was instrumental in today's magnificent talk that we're going to have with the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. So Yolanda, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your amazing contributions to this bar year. And thank you for always being available and ready and contributing to the National Bar Association. And welcome to this panel.
Thank you.
Now, when we speak of history being made in the United States, as the Honorable Fentress Driscoll has made, as Yolanda Cass-Jackson has made, being the most powerful in my humble assessment lobbyist in the state of Florida. Certainly one of them, but I would say the most. Black woman. We have to talk about Vice President of the National Bar Association, Londita Baker. The world saw emerge in splendor a young Black woman representing Breonna Taylor, saying to the world, call her name, and fighting the forces in Kentucky to bring about change and to bring about justice for Breonna Taylor's family, for that community, and for that state. And alongside Ben Crump and leading the way, Londita Baker has made a difference. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't talk about our age as women, not our real age, at least I don't. But she was not even 40 years old, young lawyer, talented lawyer, former prosecutor, and knew the law and had to actually correct the Attorney General, yes, of the state of Kentucky on the law. So Londita Baker, who is now the president-elect, or she will be sworn in as the president-elect of the National Bar Association, and will be leading this amazing organization very soon. We welcome you to this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, there are so many different roles that we play at the National Bar Association. Lakeela Stemmons is not only the National Director of Higher Heights, but she is indeed the primary architect of our legislative policy this bar year. She was instrumental in advising the bar, the Board of Governors on some very, very challenging issues. She was instrumental in the work that we did in CBAC. She was instrumental in the work that we do with the Congressional Black Caucus. She's been a reliable, steadfast, dynamic member of the National Bar Association and always on point. And for that, Lakeela, we thank you. And then finally, for this segment of our presentation, I remember when I was campaigning to be president-elect, I met with groups and talked to young lawyers. And one of the missions that I took on this year, in addition to being an advocate in the three buckets of focus, COVID-19, voter suppression, and police brutality, one of my missions was to ensure that this organization enhanced its efforts to add value to our young, dynamic, extraordinary lawyers. And the YLD, Young Lawyers Division, led by Anika Williams, they were just magnificent. Whether it was in playing a significant role during the presidential elections and our election protection efforts, or whether it was COVID work, whatever we asked of them, police brutality, they rose to the occasion. Janine Lofton, who's a legislative and policy attorney, she's also an activist, was at the core and the center of the work that we did in Florida to restore the rights, help that effort to restore the rights of those former convicted felons. Her work was absolutely instrumental in being an advocate, voice, opinion leader for the National Bar Association of Florida. So Janine, we thank you. It gives me such pleasure to see these young lawyers. I count myself amongst you, but Yolanda, we know good and well, we are not in the YLD. But we do say that we're in the YLD, but I'm so proud of Janine, Lakila, and Londita in particular. And what can I say about this panel? So please welcome this panel as we talk about just the role, when we look at diversity in legislation and how the laws and lawmakers affect our communities. And I'm going to first ask a question. And I'm going to start with you, Yolanda Cass-Jackson. As an individual lawyer in the NBA, how do you use your practice and your work, your advocacy, to make an impact in the legislative space?
Thank you for that question, Madam President. I can just say I use my role every day because my practice is lobbying. It is being an influencer and changing those things that we can change to impact the law. I think that as a member of the National Bar, I have worked tirelessly to work with our affiliate chapter, the Virgil Hawkins chapter of the National Bar Association, to bring voice. We have a program now with the legislature that allows us to do pro bono services through FAMU Law School. And we get appropriations for that this year, thanks to Representative Driscoll, if I could just mention her, and our former Senator Joyner, who you mentioned. We now get $250,000 that we use of legislative dollars to help with pro bono services, which was extremely important during this COVID crisis. So every day that I practice law, every day that I lobby the legislature, the National Bar, and this mission is on my mind.
Wonderful. Well, now I'm going to now turn and ask the question a different way for our Representative Fentress Driscoll. You're there, you are a lawmaker. What impact do you see when you have a Yolanda Cass-Jackson that comes before you? What is the impact that you see of such dynamic advocates every day? And how does that impact what you do every day in Florida?
Well, thank you, Madam President, for the question. And just before we jump in, I just have to comment, you'd mentioned in your remarks the Honorable Arthenia Joyner, former state rep and senator, advisor to presidents, and many other wonderful titles. And I just have to mention this as a point of personal privilege. We happen to both be from the same hometown. Senator Joyner was the first Black woman to serve as Democratic leader in the Senate, and I'm the first to serve as such in the House. And she's been an incredible mentor to me and so many others. And I think she might be watching today. So just wanted to personally and very humbly say thank you to Senator Joyner. And now to your question, Madam President, I mean, you are so right. Diversity matters in every aspect of the lawmaking process. As a legislator, I have lobbyists rotate in and out of my offices all the time. And unfortunately, there are very few who look like Yolanda Cass-Jackson, right? There are very few who are coming to me with that perspective and lived experience as a Black lobbyist. And so it helps to have the Yolandas of the world, because she just brings a different perspective and is able to provide her clients with that guidance and that nuance to understand how something they may do might in fact impact the Black community. And in the lawmaking process, you pull one lever over here and something over here falls down, or you push that button here and something happens, 10 feet away that you never even saw coming. And so it matters to have that representation. And I'll tell you that there are a number of us who are very vocal with other lobbying firms and lobbying teams and letting them know that we need to and expect to see more diversity. I believe that it is incumbent upon me as a Black lawmaker to push for greater diversity in the lobbying and government relations ranks, much like you would expect in-house counsel and those institutional clients to drive law firms to have greater diversity within their ranks as well.
Absolutely. And I just have to stop one moment again and give praise to Senator Arthenia Joyner, because, this year at the National Bar, the highest award that we give to our members for outstanding work in the community and excellence, demonstrated excellence, is the C. Francis Stratford Award. And as many of you know, Senator Arthenia Joyner is one of the recipients of that award for her tireless efforts, not just in the Florida legislature, not just as a past president of the National Bar and doing the work of this country, whether it was overseas, but as a global opinion leader. Because absolutely, without a question, Senator Joyner has made a difference, not just in Florida, not just in the country, but in the world. And we thank her for that. So Lawmakers Baker, President-elect, you'll be sworn in soon, Lawmakers Baker. The world witnessed you and your team making a difference in terms of policing reform in Kentucky. Can you share with us how you were able to, through your representation of Breonna Taylor's family, impact and effectuate policing reform in Kentucky?
Thank you for that question, President Hoffler. First and foremost, settlement was non-negotiable in the case of Breonna Taylor if we could not get some form of police reform. And that was per Breonna's family. So I was lucky to have a client who didn't care about the money, because that would not do anything to really justify or bring justice for the death of her daughter. But she didn't want Breonna's murder to be in vain. And so she wanted to do what she could do to make sure that there's no future Breonnas. Prior to doing civil litigation, I worked for the city of Louisville in the county attorney's office, and I advised our Louisville Metro Council, so our local government. I knew our state General Assembly was not in session. So, I was like, let's ban no-knock warrants on a local level. And we did that. I worked with Councilwoman Jessica Green, who's also an attorney in Louisville, Kentucky, and with a lobbyist from the ACLU, and we began to draft legislation to ban no-knock warrants, starting with the city of Louisville. And so I think it's important for our members to know that so often we talk about legislation, we talk about at the federal level, we overlook city and state level legislation. And so we were able to ban no-knock warrants in the city of Louisville, even before there was a ban in place within the state of Kentucky. We now also have that in the state of Kentucky. I will tell you, it was interesting because when we first began to talk about banning no-knock warrants, I was talking to the lobbyists with the ACLU that I was working with in drafting, and the Metro Council person. And I said, I don't think we'll get a complete ban because, people are going to want certain exceptions, this and that. But I let the lobbyists do what the lobbyists do. And they got in and they start talking to the different Metro Council members. And they called me one day and they were like, well, if we just get 8 more people, we can get a full ban. And I was like, well, who do we have? And so what we started to do in that grassroots effort is social media shaming those Metro Council members who had not agreed to a complete ban. And with Metro Council races, though, they have a lot smaller constituents. So they really are concerned about their public image, and they're looking at social media because they don't need, 1 million votes to lose a race. They can get beat by 2 votes from a couple hundred votes. And so they really start looking at social media. And so within a matter of 2 days, it was a complete unanimous vote to ban no-knock warrants in the city of Louisville. It was a little more difficult when we got to the state level because our state is heavily Republican. But we changed, working with the same lobbyists, we changed our mechanisms where we had been using the language of a complete ban. And talking to the Senate Majority Leader in Kentucky for the state, he's a former prosecutor. So I turned on my former prosecutor hat as well. And when we really started talking about what exceptions he wanted, and he included them in his ban, what I wanted the community to understand that in essence, it was still a complete ban on no-knock warrants because the exceptions that were carved out, you don't need a search warrant to go into a home anyway. It was things like if someone's held captive or if you suspect a murder, you can knock down a door if you think it's that type of emergency. So you don't even need a search warrant. So it's really that give and take on getting it. But it was very important to Breonna Taylor's family to make sure that Breonna saves lives in the future. She was a nurse and a emergency room technician and wanted to become a nurse. She enjoyed helping people and saving people's lives. And so we want to make sure that that is her legacy as we continue.
And the Derek Chauvin trial, and we had, Attorney General from Minnesota, Keith Ellison, one of our members, who was on that panel, and he said pretty much, Lawnnita, what you were saying, or he echoed your sentiments that yes, it's good to push federal legislation, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act for policing reform, but we have to do our work on the local and statewide level. That's critically important. So Lakila Stemmons, who's the National Director of Higher Heights, and I would like you to describe the work that you do with Higher Heights. We know you as our legislative guru, the person who gets it done, whether it's CBAC, Congressional Black Caucus, interfacing with them, because we are partners, in fact, with the Congressional Black Caucus. If they need experts, if they need lawyers to review anything, we at the NBA make ourselves available in reviewing or having to craft and draft legislation. And we have played a role in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So Lakila, can you comment from where you sit first, what you do as a National Director of Higher Heights and the constituents that you represent, and also, since you're there in Washington, the significance of the federal effort?
Yes, thank you, President Hoffler. As the National Director of Higher Heights and as a voting rights advocate, my role allows me the opportunity to be a part of an amazing organization founded by Black women and led by Black women that are on the front lines in the fight against voter suppression. We work year round to fight voter suppression through our Black Women Vote campaign. Our advocacy and grassroots mobilization and public education efforts have resulted in the protection of voting rights and ballot access for Black communities around the country. As Higher Heights enters our 10th year, we will reach higher by amplifying our work and building on the success of a record-breaking 2020 election cycle for Black women in politics by building political power and the leadership of Black women from the voting booth to elected office and creating the environment for Black women to continue to run, win, and lead. To your second question, it's been amazing to work with you and other members in the leadership of the National Bar, along with our amazing members who are also members of Congress in DC, in crafting and making sure that the George Floyd Policing Act represents the concerns and the issues that are really important to not only Black lawyers, but the communities in which we serve. It has been a joy because, like you said, we are in a partnership. We don't just ask them to come to speak to our members during convention or Day on the Hill or on CBAC. We avail ourselves to them when they need just comments on policy that they're going to introduce or subject matter expert witnesses, as you stated previously. So that has been, I would like our membership to know that we are truly, it's not just, a talking point, but we are truly engaged in helping create policy and making sure that our members and their constituents and clients, that the policies that are important to them are actually being brought to the table, advocated for, and you're seeing that as legislation is being enacted.
It's not lost on me here today that, or on anyone, that all of the panelists happen to be women, Black women. And there are many people who believe that when now President Biden's campaign was, let me say, not in the strongest of positions on any level, in any space, when he went into South Carolina, that ultimately the power of the Black women and their role, and certainly we don't want to in any way diminish the significance of what Congressman Claiborne, his significant role as well, but Black women, our block, the voting block of Black women made a difference, and indeed, many say, afforded him the victory, the presidential victory, firstly. Secondly, we know a group of Black women, 4 or 5, they were the ones who initially insisted that the president have an African-American woman as his running mate. Many called them crazy, doubted them, said it would be the destruction of the Democratic Party. You all remember all the comments. And so Janine Lofton, young woman, we talked about your role in Florida, and you're also chair of the NBA CMML. I'd like you to talk about that. What is your perspective? What is your perspective on the role that Black women played in the presidential election? Let's talk about the Senate runoff election in Georgia, because that was also very critical. What can you say as a young woman who was in the trenches in Florida about that? And I'm also going to open that question up to the panel.
Well, I'd like to start off by just saying good morning to all the panelists, and particularly to you, President Hoffler. It's wonderful to be here. Like some of the other panelists had mentioned earlier, I also like to pay a little bit of homage to Attorney Joyner. And, you know, I just cannot say enough about the importance of reaching back. And to your point, with regards to how did Black women play a pivotal role in this past election, you know that in particular, young adults, 53% of us came out and voted. So in terms of ground zero activism as attorneys, it's just wildly important for us to kind of get out there, whether or not that means that you do poll watching, or whether or not you make people aware of the fact that they actually have the right to vote, register early, or whether or not if they're in Florida, they can pay fines or fees in order to be able to get their constitutional rights back to vote. So there's many things on the horizon, and I think that me, myself, as well as other young attorneys, we play this role in technology where it meets activism, because a lot of things that have come to play in the last few years have come about because of technology. For example, even you know, with everything that happened with George Floyd, the reason why this was different than many other times before in the past is simply because this was video. So there's a lot for us to do. There's a lot more work for us to kind of pass along. There's tons of work out there, but I think that all of us as attorneys have a part to play. And I think that us, particularly as Black women need to support each other and make sure that whether or not you are a corporate, a litigator, or any other type of attorney, you do your part in terms of your activism. There's room for everyone there.
Thank you so much. So, Representative Driscoll, when we talk about, we're on the heels of the historic 2020 election cycle, and for Black women, running for elected office was just critical. So how do you use that momentum going forward to advocate for policies that benefit our community, the momentum created in coming out of the 2020 elections?
Well, thank you for that question, Madam President. And I think there are a few things. The first is you have to stay engaged, you have to stay organized, and you have to stay in relationship. So when I mean stay engaged, everyone is paying attention to politics anytime we're leading up to a big election, especially a presidential. But there's so much that's happening in the world of politics. I think it's important to stay engaged on a daily basis and understand the policies that are coming down, that are being passed down by the people that we elect, not just at the federal level, but certainly at the state level and the local levels as well. So you have to stay engaged. You have to make sure that you're on top of the news so that those very same people who relied on you for your vote, who relied on us for our vote, when they get into office and they start passing this legislation and these policies, they need to remember who helped to get them there and stay accountable to their constituencies. Staying organized. This is a critical piece. We saw Black women come out in droves. The Divine Nine came out in droves when it came to helping to get Vice President Harris and President Biden across the finish line. And after that energy in Florida, it was translated into a few different groups around the state that are led by Black women, including one, I think the largest consortium is Win with Black Women Florida, being led by our very own Yolanda Cash Jackson. And it is helping Black women across the state get organized. There are weekly meetings where you can participate and hear about the issues, where you can participate in issue groups, for example, and just help to make sure that everyone is as informed as possible and trying to impact policy. So these are ideas that can be replicated very easily in other communities and other states. Got to stay organized. And then the third piece is staying in relationship with one another. I mentioned that there are 3 different groups. And so sometimes, if we're not careful, we can have different organizations moving in different directions. But as long as we're able to stay in relationship with one another, understand that we are not in competition, as long as we keep our eyes on the prize and focus on that goal of getting more people elected who reflect our values, more people who look like us, then we're able to, march in that same direction and accomplish more. So those would be my 3 things, because it's huge momentum. We cannot afford to lose it. There's so much at stake. 2024 is just around the corner. So we must keep this momentum to make sure that we keep the White House in 2024.
Absolutely. So Yolanda, and I know Yolanda and I are going to step out for a moment, and Lakila is going to take over in just a few minutes. But Yolanda, I've got to ask you this. Under the backdrop of the reality of having 0 Black women in the U.S. Senate, 0 Black women on the U.S. Supreme Court, 0 Black women governors, what is the next step and how do we get there? Representative Driscoll mentioned Win with Black Women Florida, which you put together, and I had the pleasure of attending a couple of your meetings. But there's Win with Black Women, the national group that we attend our Sunday night meetings. But what are the next steps and how do we get there?
We are on the road right now to those next steps. If this was Sunday morning, I would throw up my hands and go back a little bit to say amen for what Representative Driscoll mentioned. But we cannot forget that during this pandemic, during the time of a pandemic, that Black women all over this country organized through sororities, through links, through Jack and Jill. I know within my own chapter, we would have a meeting with some 400 women just in South Florida talking about issues. We have to stay informed. We have to make sure that we're working on both sides of the aisle to hold folks accountable. We are already working to change those numbers. And I will end with this. In the state of Florida, we did not have our first member of Congress till 1992. We did not have our first Black member of the Florida Senate until 1982. Some things just take time, but we are on the verge of making something significant happen, and I think we'll see changes all over this country.
And can I just chime in on that?
Yes, please, go ahead. I was going to say, as we're transitioning, as you all know, as President Hoffler previously stated, I am going to be taking over the role of moderator for a little bit while they are gone to prepare a very special guest, a historic moment actually in National Bar Convention history. So I'm going to take over, but yes, please, Representative Driscoll, please chime in.
Thank you so much, because I think Yolanda was hitting the nail on the head, and I just wanted to drill down even further. How do we get to that place of having Black women senators again in the U.S. Senate? How do we have a Black woman governor? It really takes a village in order to raise a candidate, in order to help a candidate get across the finish line. And there are a number of things you can do. First, find Black women candidates in your area who you want to support. Or maybe even if you're out there, you think about running for office yourself. I'll tell you that Black women lawyers are always a good, strong bet, because our training as lawyers prepare us to be lawmakers, prepare us to be policymakers, and also just, I think, imbues us with a sense of professionalism where you're able to work across the aisle, which helps us to get things done. I know that's been very helpful to me in Florida. I happen to be a Democrat and our legislature is very Republican dominated, but you have to, it shouldn't matter. You should be able to work across the aisle to accomplish the goals that you want. The other thing that I would say is that you have to give, and you have to give, and you have to give some more. It takes resources to run strong campaigns. So if there are candidates that you like, make sure that you are supportive of them. I'll tell you that before I ran for office, I thought I was someone who was very, involved in politics and dedicated, and maybe I'd give $50 here or $100 there. And please hear me and understand that every amount helps. But when you're talking about somebody running for US Senate and they have to raise tens of millions of dollars, or running for a gubernatorial race and they have to raise, again, tens of millions of dollars, really try to give as much as you can and as generously as you can, because everything helps. And then the third piece that I would mention is help them expand their network. So, we always say your network is your net worth. If you have people in your network that you can introduce a candidate to, whether it's for raising money or maybe even just, to make new contacts that can help that candidate in other ways, it's important to do that. And another great way to do that is by amplifying candidates on social media. So if there are candidates that you like, make sure that you follow them and that you retweet them or you share their materials, because that's what the resources are for, right? Trying to help raise the candidate's name recognition. So that's a really great thing that you can do that's actually no cost to you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to bring this back full circle to the National Bar Association and our duty not only to the organization, but also to the legal community as a whole. All of you are very successful in your own right, in your own avenues of the law. Let's talk about engagement in the National Bar Association, not only on the national level, but also on the regional and the local affiliate level as well. What is your advice to not only younger lawyers, but also our seasoned attorneys as well, that are members of the National Bar, and how they can be continually engaged? And if they haven't yet been engaged in advocating for policy and just making sure that their voices are heard within the National Bar, can we talk on that? And I'm going to start with our former Vice President of Sections and Divisions, who is now our newly elected President-elect, Lawmakers Baker.
Thank you for that question, Attorney Stemmons. I think definitely the regions, affiliates, we have to, as an organization as a whole, engage the regions and affiliates when it comes to legislation and legislative policies. Earlier, I spoke about legislation on local and state levels. We put together, and the Board of Governors each year approves a legislative agenda for the National Bar Association. But so much of the time we focus on taking that to Washington, D.C. And while it is important that we are in Washington, D.C., and we are lobbying and we are supporting the members of of Congress that are also members of the National Bar Association and doing our parts to promote their legislation, we also have to take our legislative agenda and tailor it to where it can be used on a state and local level. And I think that will engage our affiliate chapters, and it gives them something to look forward to when they go to their days on the Hill or when they meet with their Metro Council members. And I think Representative Driscoll is correct. And lawyers in general, we have an obligation to make sure we are sending the right people to our state legislators. We know better than anyone the dangers that bad law can have on, whether it's personal injury litigation, whether it's criminal law, whether it's education, employment. Bad legislation affects our practices in so many ways. And so we have to make sure that not only are we supporting those candidates to get their name recognition out there, but we're also informing our communities on, here are the right candidates. Here are the people we need to be electing. We can't let our communities rely on who's able to get the most commercials on TV or the radio. We have to really educate our communities on, and I did that a lot when I had last year, all of the world was paying attention to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And anytime I was on media and someone asked me, I said, we have to vote the right people into state legislature. We have to get the right president, and the president race really mattered, because you talk about a Department of Justice that was not investigating for patterns and practice investigations against police departments. We definitely needed that back. It is back. And so we have to educate our communities on just how important legislation and those who we are electing to those positions are to the things that we're out protest. So when we talk about grassroots organization, this is how we change what you're protesting against.
So Attorney Lofton, I'm going to turn to you right now. And as the chair of our communications section, let's talk about what we can do as lawyers within and outside of the National Bar to advocate for the policies that actually represent the needs and wants of our communities.
Thanks so much, Attorney Simmons. Just, to add to this discussion, being the chair of the Communications Law section and being a member of the Board of Governors, I'm also, very active on a local level. So I'm on the board of Gwyneth Cherry Black Women Lawyers Association. And, to the point that Representative Driscoll made and Attorney Baker made earlier, making sure that you're there at ground zero on the state level, even on the local level. Those things are the things that trickle up. It's not a secret that we've had a lot of bad bills that have come out of Florida, particularly as they pertain to voting rights. It wouldn't be fair for me just to go back to this past session, but I could go back sessions in the past. So oftentimes, even though, even Representative Driscoll, even though she might be a Dem, and it's a Republican House, you might not be able to stop what's going to happen, but you can definitely either slow it down or maybe modify it. And a lot of times that comes through communications from constituents. And, ultimately, when we have these elected officials, these folks are voted in by people that look like us. And, that's if you're voting. So I think awareness, which is something that Attorney Baker mentioned earlier, is something that needs to happen. And the other thing that maybe isn't always discussed is that this needs to happen much earlier than when it is. I don't feel like it makes sense to just start the discussion about voting rights and that sort of thing when you're 18. These are the sort of things that need to be taught like earlier on, and more particularly for us. And sometimes I feel like the first time folks are getting familiar with their elected officials is when they're at a church function and that elected official decides to stop through. I think that it's incumbent upon us as National Bar members to make certain that we engage other attorneys and let them know we were a resource. But I think it's incumbent on us as attorneys to make sure that our family members and friends are aware of what's happening in politics. So that would be my stand, is to get more involved, get more involved, get more involved.
Attorney Lofton, thank you so much. And because we do have a subject matter expert when it comes to legislative policy in Representative Driscoll, I want to ask you this just as a follow-up question. When evaluating good, bad, whether it's good or bad, new legislation, what are your priority assessments and what is your strategy? As a lawmaker, that very well may help us as constituents when it comes to what we should advocate for or against.
Thank you for that question. And so the lens that I look through, I want to know who's it going to help, who's it going to hurt, and if it's hurting a particular group, can we modify it in such a way that it's beneficial to everybody? How do we all win? In other words, and Attorney Lofton made reference that there's a lot of bad legislation that comes out of Florida. I got to tell you, as an attorney in the legislature, it is one of the most rewarding experiences, but also extraordinarily frustrating, because there is so much unconstitutional legislation that comes out of our legislature here. But I know that I'm not alone. Having served on other national panels, I hear this from other lawmakers across the country, particularly when they're dealing with Republican-led legislatures. So I have to look at it. I try to think, who's it going to help? Who's it going to hurt? To Attorney Lofton's point, then you have to decide, can you slow it? Can you stop it? If not, can you slow it down? If not, can you modify it? Sometimes even that's not possible, because when it comes to the really big issues, sometimes those partisan divides run very deep and you can't get the agreement on bipartisanship. But then there's another strategy, which is how do you counteract it? So for example, here in Florida, just as a case study, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the murder of Breonna Taylor and too many other unarmed Black people to name, our governor, rather than show leadership and try to embrace the diverse communities that were out marching for justice, he instead dangled this piece of legislation known as House Bill 1. House Bill 1 is an anti-protester bill. It creates new felonies for protesting. It's been in the media recently because, it was such a crackdown on Black Lives Matter protesters. But then we have folks marching in the street now in solidarity with the Cubans over in Cuba and against the Cuban government. And you had folks who were blocking traffic on the highways who were not arrested. So it's a total, very clear double standard. Not to mention this law is unconstitutional. It infringes on First Amendment rights and so many other things. So you've got this bill that is very bad, and particularly bad for Black people and other communities of color. It does nothing to keep our community safe. So what do? The Florida Legislative Black Caucus started meeting and trying to think through what legislation we wanted to propose. So we worked on putting forth a police reform package, and we just started working it as hard as we could, getting as much bipartisan support as we could, meeting with stakeholders in the community, as well as meeting with folks in the law enforcement community. And the result, it doesn't go as far as I want to, but it probably goes further than they want it to. And that's the art of compromise. And it is going to actually help keep our community safer. It is creating a requirement for all basic training officers to be trained on the duty to intervene. So if they see another officer with his knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, they know they have to intervene. They know they have a duty to render medical assistance, making it so that bad officers can't jump from agency to agency. They have to provide an affidavit to their prospective new employer if they resigned or were terminated while under investigation. So lots of great stuff we were able to get done by working across the aisle and trying to counteract the nonsense and unconstitutional foolishness that was House Bill 1. So that's another strategy. Sometimes you can't change what's on the table. So you have to, put your own proposal on the table and work that as well.
Thank you so much for that insight. We truly appreciate it. Your lived experience and expertise is literally invaluable to our National Bar members. Just to pivot just a little bit, I believe we can all agree and state without fear of contradiction that the work of National Bar members who served in our election protection initiatives were instrumental in this historic and record-breaking 2020 election cycle. In all of your opinions, and I'm going to start with you, President-elect Baker, what more or what can we continue to do in this fight against voter suppression as National Bar members?
I think we, as National Bar members, as the organization and our individual members, our affiliate chapters, we have to continue to fight against the legislations, state legislations that are being passed. We have to continue to urge our legislators that are in our federal legislators to end the filibuster. We've seen that. We've seen our federal legislators coming out, our Democratic legislators coming out and protesting and calling for an end to the filibuster. We have to do that at the federal level, but also combat the state legislative laws that are being passed to suppress the vote of our communities. And although they say it's not to suppress the vote of our communities, we know that it is our communities that are impacted by these laws. And if they didn't, they wouldn't change it after, what happened in 2022. We had a very good year. And so there's nothing to do but to continue to fight, to continue to have the election protection experts at the helm of the National Bar Association, working with the National Bar Association, working with organizations like Higher Heights that are out there doing election protection efforts. Also the Urban League, the NAACP. We have to join together. We're stronger together. And that's the only way we're going to overcome these states that are trying to suppress our vote. Sorry.
No, that was great, actually, Attorney Baker, because I'm going to turn now to Chair Lofton, but I'm going to pick up on something you just mentioned, and that was strategic partnerships and alliances with our partners in this work that we do. Chair Lofton, can you talk about the importance of actually partnering and having alliances with other legacy organizations, but also newer, younger organizations that are in this space and doing the work?
Thank you so much for that question, because it just leads me to this past summer. This past summer, I brought the idea of the fact that we're having a real issue down here in Florida with, if anyone's familiar with Desmond Meade's organization, which goes back to, Voters' Restoration of Rights. We had it where, if you were a returning citizen, you could not vote. And one of the mechanisms that was put forth was a Senate bill that made it so that you literally had to pay your fines or fees in order to be able to vote. But the issue was that oftentimes these returning citizens weren't being apprised of what it was, the fine or the fee. So it was a tantamount to a taking of voting rights. So that was something I brought to the bar. We had our experts there, like Barbara Onwine and her partners, and we had this huge space and this huge backing, and we were able to do something on a national level. Junius Williams was pretty instrumental in that. He used some of his backing, and then we had other organizations like Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the Links, all of the Divine Nine, I think, took part of it. I think that ultimately, a lot of us that are a part of the bar bring with us other organizations. And to your point, I think to make that connectivity one of those things that matter most, that are bubbled up, is something that we should be thinking about when we are thinking about what we want to do next in terms of making a difference. So the affiliate chapters are wildly important. The chairs of the different sections are wildly important. And I think just those synergies are what we need to focus on as young attorneys.
Thank you so much, Chair Lofton. Let's look at this, at the 2020 election cycle. In a moment which we are celebrating our first Black woman president, vice president, excuse me. I just put that out in the universe when I said president, so I'm hoping you all receive that and claim that. But as we celebrate our first Black woman vice president, Kamala D. Harris, and our other Black women leaders, 52 years after Shirley Chisholm's historic election as the first Black woman in Congress, Black women remain the backbone of our democracy, and we are more than qualified to lead it. As we have previously stated, we have an amazing surprise for you all. Thank you for joining us on this morning. I am excited that this panel has literally been Black women leading, not only in the law, but in civil rights, in communications, in social justice. And as we get ready to have President Hoffler join us, we are going to be excited to have them come back in. But before they join us again, I want to be able to turn it back to Representative Driscoll, just to talk about the fact that while everyone right now is focused on voting rights, sometimes we know that things tend to differ back and forth. As we are doing an amazing job as lawyers, what more can we do? Just really briefly, can you give a charge as we, you know what? I'm going to save that. I'm going to pin that later. I am now going to turn it right back over to our president, C.K. Hoffler, for a special session.
Thank you so much. So ladies and gentlemen of the National Bar, today we are making history. We've made history on so many levels, fighting voter suppression, fighting to educate our communities on COVID and how to fight COVID, and also fighting police brutality. But today, we have the absolute honor and pleasure of welcoming one of our own, the extraordinary, dynamic, brilliant, and impactful Vice President of the United States of America. And that would be none other than the Kamala Harris. And let me just take a moment to speak about this extraordinary leader of the world who has made a difference by her very presence and her essence. What we know is that the vice president was a district attorney. We know that she was the Attorney General of California. We know that she was a U.S. Senator. We know that when she was in the U.S. Senate, she introduced the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We know that she's been a champion of civil rights, of human rights, of equality, of justice, of fairness. We know that she's leading the White House efforts on voting rights, traveling the country, meeting with various groups, getting out the message that we must fight voter suppression. We must advance everyone's right to vote. We must combat the state legislation, the anti-voting state legislation, this voter suppression legislation. We know that on a national level, she's meeting with business leaders, with faith leaders, with our grassroots organizations, and she is meeting with, for instance, legislators in different states, such as Texas. We saw those brave men and women in Texas who said, no, no more. We know that she's using the office of vice president in an unprecedented way, ladies and gentlemen. She's building national coalitions to protect the right to vote. And ladies and gentlemen, we know she's not new. Our vice president of the United States is not new to the National Bar Association, because indeed, she's a member of the National Bar Association, one of our affiliate chapters in California, Charles Houston Bar Association. And so it is with a great deal of humility and honor that I introduce the Vice President of the United States. And if I can take a moment of personal privilege in saying that when I was recently in Paris, when Reverend Jackson received the highest honor of anyone that can receive in France, any civilian or any military, and we were meeting with President Macron, it meant so much. It was a completely different narrative when the Vice President of the United States looked like me. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you the most impactful, powerful woman in the world, our member, Vice President Kamala Harris.
Oh, my goodness. Madam President, oh, that means so much to me. Thank you for your friendship and your leadership. I have to tell all the members, I see, if I can take a personal privilege and refer to Madam President as CK, I see CK everywhere. She is in DC. I see her out there fighting every day for the voices of everyone who deserves to be seen and heard. So thank you for those beautiful words. And it is so wonderful to be with so many friends today. You know, as CK said, as Madam President said, I am a very proud former, but I think of myself still as a current member of the National Bar Association. And I want to wish everyone congratulations on the 96th convention of this august organization. And so let me thank again President Hoffler, President-elect Judge Carlos Moore, for your leadership and for the leadership of everyone, because this is a membership of leaders. And, you know, we all have different reasons why we became lawyers, but a lot of the same reasons, which include the values that our parents and our community instilled in us, the injustice that we witnessed around the world and in our own world, and the heroes who inspired us. And for me, like many of you, it was a little bit of all of that. In particular, in my own family, I saw my Uncle Sherman, who was one of the first African-American lawyers to graduate from Bolt Hall. And, you know, Uncle Sherman, I remember he was often the first that folks would call when they were facing a crisis or when people just couldn't make sense of a situation. Uncle Sherman was a lawyer, and in the spirit and with the training of this profession, he helped people, and they depended on him. And I saw that, and I watched that growing up. And I wanted to help people. I wanted to do that. And that was one of the reasons, including Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston and Constance Baker Motley, that I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to help people, and in particular to help remove the barriers that stood in their way, to help people everywhere, to defend themselves, to define themselves as opposed to being defined by others, and to determine their own future. And I know this is something we all share. And it's what still drives us all today. And that is why, as Vice President, I am so proud to lead our administration's efforts on voting rights. And we all know the history of this issue. The National Bar Association, its members, and everything it represents played an integral role in shaping that history, the history of voting or the lack of voting in America. Because just think about it, when people were fighting against poll taxes, Black lawyers were there. When people were marching in the streets, registering voters in the South, Black lawyers were there. When blood was being shed on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, Black lawyers were there. It is our members, it is Black lawyers who helped to lead the fight for the right to vote. And today, it is they, it is we, who are leading the fight to defend that right. Shelby County v. Holder, Brnovich v. the Democratic National Committee. Yes, the names of the cases have changed, but as we know, the fight remains. Because here's the truth. This fight has always been about self-determination. This fight has always been about who is seen as a person worthy of the rights of citizenship and the ability to exercise those rights, about who has a voice in what happens to them, to their families, and to our country. So simply put, the right to vote is the right that unlocks all other rights. And let's take a moment to think about last year, about 2020. Voters, so they want jobs. They called for jobs. They voted. And now more than 3 million jobs have been created. Voters called for relief. They voted. And now HBCUs received $2.6 billion, and families are getting monthly child tax credit payments. Voters, well, they called for a national vaccination plan. They voted, and now more than 160 million Americans have been vaccinated. But I'll say, and I said this to Madam President, as an aside, and I say this to all of the members, the NBA leaders, if you know somebody who has not yet been vaccinated, please remind them. The vast majority of people who are in the hospital now, and almost everyone who has recently died from COVID, are unvaccinated. This is no joke. Now back to the voters, which include a lot of folks. Voters in 2020 also called for more diversity and representation in our judicial system. They demanded it, as did the NBA. And they voted. And now we have confirmed as an administration more Black women to be circuit court judges in just 6 months than any other administration in all of history. All that to say, the vote matters. But in the year 2021, 18 state legislatures so far have enacted 30 new laws that will make it more difficult to vote. And I believe they want to make it more difficult so that folks don't vote. Because just think about it. In the last election, voters were able to cast their ballots weeks before Election Day so they could make a plan to vote. With all of the burdens and the demands of life, they could make a plan to go and vote. They didn't have to just go on Election Day. Voters in the last election were able to cast their ballots by mail. Voters were able to drop their ballots in drop boxes. But now, state legislatures are trying to limit these options, reducing the number of days in early voting, reducing the number of drop boxes that are available, making it more difficult for people to stand in line to receive food and water. But here's the thing. Not everyone can stand in line for hours to vote on Election Day. We all know that. Nor should they have to. Americans need options to be able to cast their ballot, which is their right. And remember, this fight isn't only about who gets to vote or how. This is also about who gets to count the vote. Let's not lose sight of what's going on out there. Because some of these state legislatures are also trying to shift authorities from trusted local election officials to partisan political actors. So we must fight back against all of these efforts. We must fight to pass the For the People Act, which would create national voting standards, get dark money out of politics, and create fair representation by ending extreme partisan redistricting. We must fight to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would prevent discriminatory laws and changes in voting laws that would discriminate. We must fight, NBA, we must fight on many fronts, including our Department of Justice, which under the leadership of Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta and Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark, has said it will change anti-voter and challenge, and by challenging, hopefully change, anti-voter laws. Civil rights organizations are similarly contesting anti-voter laws in the courts. And lawyers, including many of you, are starting to plan now to mount massive voter protection programs for next year's election. And let us pause for a moment to reflect and praise the incredible leadership of the National Bar Association, always and most recently in 2020, because it was the NBA and its members that were answering calls on the hotline, responding to litigation needs, monitoring the polls, and it made a difference. And so as we move forward, it's going to take all of us to ensure that all Americans can vote and have their vote counted in a fair and transparent process. So, I mentioned earlier that the National Bar Association has helped to shape history on so many levels, and especially this. And indeed it has. And that is because time and again, members of this organization have risen to the moment. When Black lawyers were barred from joining other legal associations, the founders created this one. When people of color and poor people could not afford counsel, this organization set up free legal clinics and offered pro bono services. When segregation kept people of color, kept Black people from being able to determine their future, it was lawyers among this membership who were among the leaders who argued against it. And today, as the right to vote is yet again under attack, I know that the members of the National Bar Association will rise once again to the moment, because we believe and we know our democracy is stronger when everyone can participate, and it is weaker when anyone is left out. So thank you all for your ongoing commitment, for your excellence, for your work. Thank you, and may God bless you, and may God bless America. I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Thank you so much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we heard it from our Vice President of the United States. We have our charge as a National Bar Association. So I know that we are now in the middle of our presidential showcase, and we're going to incorporate the charge from our Vice President, our National Bar Association member, Vice President Kamala Harris, into what we discuss. Because after all, this panel is diversity in legislation, and the Vice President touched on how we can play a critical role in moving the bar as it relates to voter suppression. So I'm going to ask that the other panelists come back in the room and that we resume our panel. You know, it was just, I have to say that the wind was taken out of me, but I feel energized now more than ever after hearing from the Vice President of the United States. So I'm going to just pause for a moment and thank God for this moment. Thank God for the recognition, and thank God for the power of the National Bar Association. Because from the founding mothers and fathers of this organization to where we are today, each president of the National Bar Association has played a critical role in advancing the mission of this incredible organization. 14 Black women, I'm number 14, Black women presidents of the National Bar Association, and all of the other incredible presidents of the National Bar Association, our membership, our leaders, we've all played a role, and we have to continue to fight. A luta continua, vittoria es certa. Y'all have heard me say that all year. The struggle continues, but victory is certain. So, Lakila, I believe that you had a question pending. You know, our Vice President puts us in the moment of fighting for voting rights, but you did have a question pending. And so,
I did. And I'm going to be honest with you, like everyone, I'm sure all of us, I am a fangirl of our Vice President. I have to give a shout out to the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. But I am totally, I did have a question that was pending, and it was for the representative. And I guess my question, I believe, was just bringing it all together. And our Vice President hit on it, and that is what we need to do to protect the right to vote, not only on a national level within the National Bar. And President Hoffler, just kudos to you for empowering us and literally issuing a charge to us to, in the words of Charles Hamilton Houston, that we are either, attorneys are either social engineers or parasites on society. And thank you for literally convening us and leading the charge to make sure that as a body, as members, as Black lawyers, that we were engaged in voter protection initiatives. And I really just want to say to you, thank you. Your leadership was just incomparable in that. And I think you deserve all of just the acknowledgement of making sure that we were engaged, because what we saw from the National Bar in 2020 was unprecedented, especially not only for 2020, but there was a special runoff election in Georgia, which you made sure that just because the election was over, we did not sit down. And Attorney Lofton, to you as well, especially the young lawyers, Attorney Williams, Attorney Lofton, thank you, because you all were truly foot soldiers in Georgia. And I truly believe that we have the democracy that we are looking at now because of the work that National Bar lawyers did. So back to, I'm so sorry, but Representative Driscoll, if you could just impart just words, and then circle back to President Hoffler, a continued charge, right? Moving into this next election cycle that we're going to see in 2022 that I do not hope resembles what we saw in 2010.
Well, thank you so much. And yes, kudos to President Hoffler. Your leadership is just amazing. And I also am fangirling, not just over what Vice President Harris said, but also what President Hoffler has said. And I'm going to try to bring myself back to my body because this feels like an out-of-body experience today. But just to try to bring that all together. So Vice President Harris, in her inimitable way, shared with us information about all of these legislatures across the country passing voter suppression laws. So in church, we would just say, I stopped by to tell you today, don't expect 2022 to be easier than 2020. Do not think for a second that we can take our foot off the gas. We cannot, right? So we have to be prepared. And, I think about in Florida, we had this bill, Senate Bill 90, SB 90, which, by the way, I serve as policy chair for the Dems right now, but our policy lead on SB 90 and attacking it was a Black woman representative out of Jacksonville, Representative Tracy Davis, who did a phenomenal job. If you ever see those Now This videos and things that go viral, Now This Politics featured her because we put up such a fight, and she was the tip of the spear for us on that. But as we reflected on that loss, we did everything we could to stop that bad bill. One aspect of the bad bill, for example, there's a 150-foot zone now where you cannot engage with or solicit voters from the polling place. Back in the day, it used to be something like 50 feet. Now they've extended it to 150 feet. And one of the things we're worried about, in Florida, it's hot. In the South, it gets really hot. It's hot right now outside my window. It's 90-something degrees. So people are trying to vote. They need to get back to work. It's uncomfortable. And with this legislation, we wouldn't even be able to give them a bottle of water within that 150 feet zone. Couldn't give people a snack. Rather than focus on why the voting lines are so long in the first place, we're worried about making it harder for people to vote. Just foolishness. So what we have to do, the conclusion we came to, guess what? We have to outwork them. We have to outsmart them. Give people the water at 151 feet if you have to, right? Like give them the snacks then. Like we cannot take our feet off the gas. And especially in these states where we don't have the balance of power, when the balance of power is not represented by individuals who represent our values, let that drive us to be even more vigilant into the next cycle and making sure that we elect people who do reflect our values. One other point I wanted to mention was redistricting and how much that plays a factor in all of this, right? We know that the majority of Americans actually do share our values, right? We know that we have Democratic presidents who have won the national popular vote, and sometimes they don't win. We know that that's because of the Electoral College. We know that in Florida that we have issues with redistricting, and I imagine in other states you have these same issues. And hear me when I say, I know I sound very partisan because I am a Democrat, but I actually do believe that government can be best when you have that give and take across either side of the aisle. But what we have in states like mine are things are way too out of balance. And part of that is redistricting. In Florida, the new district lines are drawn after the census. We go through a reapportionment cycle and they're drawn by the legislature, the very people who would benefit most from these maps being drawn. We have to make sure that we are electing people who are going to be honest and conscientious with respect to redistricting as well. That's also a charge I think it'd be great for the NBA to take up. We've got another 10 years before we get there again to another redistricting cycle. Or actually in Florida, we're going through it right now. But I just mean in terms of having people elected who reflect values and who will do the right thing by those maps, make sure that there's adequate minority representation, but also that the maps are balanced and fair and not gerrymandered to benefit certain party over another party. So that's something else that I would love to see the NBA keep its eye and its focus on, because that has such an impact on our state elections, but our national elections as well.
Well, and if I could say, and thank you so much, Representative Driscoll, and one thing that we know, whatever happens in Florida is trickling over to Georgia, or whatever happens in Georgia scoots over to Florida. I'm not sure what and forgive me for using this very informal word, but whatever crazy in the scheme of voter suppression happens in Florida, happens in Georgia, and vice versa. When I say crazy things, as you indicated, not being able to give anyone water, not being able to give anyone food, not being able to help people, that is unconscionable, unconscionable. But yet we have to educate our communities how to vote despite that, because we may not get a reversal of those voter suppressive laws before the elections. So I think part of the effort I know here in Georgia are grassroots organizations, community organizations right now are educating our voters just in case there's no reversal, because we still have to ensure that people have the right to vote. And, you know, Representative, you said it best, Driscoll, you said it best. It should not be partisan. The right to vote should not be partisan. What are people afraid of? Quite frankly, it's a nonpartisan concept. Everybody should want people to have the right to vote. Not everybody except for Black and brown people, not everybody except for progressive people, not everybody except for Democrats, but everybody. And so we at the National Bar and our election protection effort and our nonpartisan way have to continue to fight and to support the efforts, extraordinary efforts, for example, of Representative Driscoll and others who are in the trenches every day in all of the states. You know, Lawmakers, you're in Kentucky. Kentucky is kind of special too. We have a robust presence in Texas. We've got our own Rodney Ellis fighting every day. He was one of the group of legislators that left. Imagine you have to leave Texas. You have to leave your state in order to get justice. So we have a lot of National Bar Association members in these states, in these jurisdictions. We have to help. I offered to the Texans just to assemble a group of lawyers in case anyone got arrested. Can you imagine the governor saying when they come back, they're going to get arrested? So I said, okay, well, let us have our National Bar Association lawyers represent them if they do get arrested. A group of people, including Reverend Jackson, Barbara Arnwine, and other National Bar Association members, got arrested for protesting voter suppression in Washington. Well, that's how many of us got arrested. And Senator Joyner, as you know, when she was protesting with the groups of people in front of the South African Embassy, leading the way from the National Bar Association, she got arrested. And the then executive director, John Crump, came and got her out of jail. I mean, this is how we roll, ladies and gentlemen of the National Bar Association. We fight for justice because we're not going to be that parasite. We're COVID, no COVID, some COVID. We're not going to be the parasite. We're going to be the social engineer. In today's parlance, it's called the social justice engineer. So, Lakila, I'm going to ask you to continue because you're doing such a phenomenal job. And I'm just going to inject, but I do think that we have to make sure that our message is clear, that we are all on the same page. And if we have 80 affiliates in all of the sections and divisions that we have, there's power in that. In our private meeting with the president, I was saying, you know, we have 80 affiliate chapters. She said, I know. And she talked about her affiliate in California and the role that they play, have continued to play in making a difference. So we need to now mobilize. We've got our vice president just for a little bit, for another day. I guess tonight you're sworn in, Vice President Londita Baker of affiliates. And so we need to lead the charge, make sure, and I know many of the leaders are on this line, are watching us and certainly tuned into the vice president, so that we understand that people can count on the National Bar Association, continue to count on us, because I've always counted on us to step up and fight voter suppression. Okay, Madam Lakila, Madam Chair.
In this COVID virtual environment for over a year now, and I am one of those people who still can't figure out sometimes how to unmute themselves. So that's that little look of like, what's going on here? That was that. Thank you so much, Madam President. So I want to go back and circle on something, and also if the chat moderators, if someone is typing questions in the chat and they have questions, could someone queue them up? Because I want to make sure that if there are questions that our members have that they want to, that are important, like, because, interaction and engagement is what we do. And so I want to make sure if there are questions that they're being answered. But to go back to something that was mentioned earlier, and that is the fact that we have currently, with the ascension of Vice President Harris to the office of Vice President, we currently have 0 Black women in the Senate. While we do have 25 in the House of Representatives, it is not lost on me, and it should not be lost on you, that we have never had a Black woman to serve as governor in the United States of America. Nor have we ever had a Black woman on the Supreme Court in our country's 243-year history. And that is something that has to change. Black women are the defenders of our homes, our communities, of our democracy, and we are set and fit and ready to lead. And that brings me to two amazing, phenomenal attorneys that we have on our panel, and that is President-elect Baker and Attorney Cass Jackson. President-elect Baker has been instrumental in the movement against police brutality, and I will give credit all day to past President Ben Crump's, Attorney Chris Stewart, but as a Black woman, I salute and say her name all the time, and that is our President-elect Lawmakers Baker, who is doing a phenomenal job, as President Hoffler stated, advocating not only for Breonna Taylor's family, but Breonna's Law. And then many of you has heard mention of Win with Black Women. That is a coalition of Black women leaders across this country, women from who are literally everyday women, every demographic, every socioeconomic background. It is a coalition of Black women who convene together just to make sure that Black women are staying engaged and that we are not just seen as a voting bloc on election day. And if you all could just speak as 2 Black women who are truly leading in this moment, speak to how our members can be engaged. Everyone, as far as advocating for laws and policies, President-elect Baker, that are important to us. And then Attorney Cass Jackson, if you can just talk about organizations like Win with Black Women that we can, as individuals, be engaged in to make sure that we are truly changing the face of our democracy.
I've said it a number of times today. I think we have to make sure that we're focusing on all elections. I know during the candidates forum, during the convention, I was asked about the 2022 midterm elections. And I said, oh, if we wait till 2022, we're too late. We need to be engaged and be engaged now, continue the engagement, and not just general elections. We got to make sure we're getting the correct parties through primaries. And so I think that we have to make sure we're asking candidates in primary elections, really, because we're a nonpartisan organization. But I think if we took a poll of our membership, we know where most of us fall on the political spectrum. But we need to ask the questions of all candidates, holding candidate forums for our communities and asking those questions of what is your proposed legislation as it relates to police reform? What is your legislation as it relates to education and the educational divide between our children, our Black children? I know with the technology divide during COVID, are struggling, and we have to make sure that our legislators and the people that we are putting into state legislatures and the federal legislation are doing things to make sure that our children are given an opportunity to come up to par. What is your stance as it relates to election protection and voter suppression? And what do you plan to do to change if laws have been passed in Florida? What do you plan to do to recall that legislation? In Kentucky, we've been blessed enough because President Hoffler is correct. We'll look crazy up here too. We have a House that is 75 out of 100 people are Republican, and 25 out of 34 senators are Republican. So it is heavily Republican. So when I say we have to get creative when it comes to talking to legislations, because we have to get along with the Republicans, right? We don't know how long it flipped in the 2018 election. Not 2018 is when we flipped. And so we're just like, it's new to Kentucky. but we're learning. We have to change the way that we do things to get legislation that benefits our communities passed. We're lucky we have a governor who has vetoed legislation like anti-protest bills that make it a felony to insult a police officer, because those are going on in Kentucky as well. But what happened? So that election is in and off. It's the gubernatorial election is in a it's only state elections on the ballot at the time. We don't have any federal elections with it. We don't have city elections. So generally people are disengaged. We have to make sure that we at least have that governor there that is serving as a checks and balance on a skewed legislature that is not there for our communities. So we have to continue to stay engaged. We have to keep our affiliate chapters engaged. Our affiliate chapters have to let the NBA know when we can step in, because we're everywhere. So we may not know that you need us in Oklahoma, that you need us in Kentucky. So you have to let us know when you need the NBA to step in and help with a specific fight. I think it's important that we do that. We're all here for each other. And with that, I'll turn it over to Yolanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I, like President Hoffler, am overwhelmed with excitement, with anticipation, understanding that this is how Esther must have felt when she realized that it was such a time as this. This panel and the people that are on this panel, the women that are on this panel, are indicative of what we're going through nationally as we see Black women emerge and take their rightful place in leadership roles. We have the opportunity through each of us individually to make a difference. Win with Black Women is simply a collective of women of all ages, intergenerational. They said we couldn't get along, that the AKs and the Deltas and the Zetas couldn't get along, but we did. And we found a way to find that common sense of urgency, that common sense of pain, that common sense of purpose to make a difference. Personally, I found that I could work with other people that had specific interests, the same interests. We formed during the pandemic the National Black Professional Lobbyists Association because we realized that corporations had a responsibility to make sure that there was diversity of thought. And so each of us have a role to play. And as Black lawyers, I take this so seriously, the importance of the role that we play. When I think about the fact that my father didn't have the opportunity to go to the University of Florida, that the state of Florida paid for him to go somewhere else. And he never did make it back to law school, but here I am, and I can make a difference, and I plan to make it. This whole idea of what Black women are doing, what the National Bar is doing, I think our responsibility is not to just make this a moment, but to make it a movement. Not to make it a moment, but to make it a movement. And I think that we can do that individually, make corporations that talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, make them prove it. We have whole industries in our lobbying arena that have no representation that look like us, yet they spend our dollars and depend on our dollars. That's where we can make a difference. So I am full with expectation, full with humiliation, and as we prepare for what's next. And that's real. That's real. And I will continue to do my little part, this little girl from Liberty City, trying to make a difference in the lives to make this a movement.
Thank you so much. You all I'm like, okay, where's the offering plate? Because it feels like I'm like, are we having church in here today?
Yeah.
So we have an amazing question that I am going to ask our panelists, and I'm actually going to start off with President Hoffler to ask this question. And while it was state specific, the question that came up, I'm just going to make it, across the country, whether you're a lawyer or not, but what can people do on the ground to help, especially in battleground states, whether it's, Texas, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Florida? What can we do, right? Because not everybody has the same passion. I'm a voting rights advocate. Your thing may not be voting rights. It may be redistricting. And I want to plug that at 1:15, after we're done, our young lawyers, I believe, are having a panel on redistricting. We have to support our young lawyers division because that is a pipeline to leadership. And without them, the sustainability of this organization would be in jeopardy. So please, when you're picking your CLEs this afternoon, support our young lawyers. But Madam President, if you could speak on what can be done on a grassroots mobilization or public education effort that our members can get engaged in that may not be typical of what we think lawyers do.
Silver lining in the COVID cloud is that we can be very impactful virtually. So what people can do right now, if they're in communities, every community is facing voter suppression. Let's just face it, it is. All of our communities are facing voter suppression. All Black and brown communities, there are not going to be any exceptions. So what you can do, whether it is doing a virtual, as we did in the Senate runoff elections and the presidential elections, virtual meetings with your church members, with the organizations that you're members of. We've heard that the Divine Nine came together. I mean, I will just note for the record, there are many today that have on red or intensified pink. It just depends on the lens through which you look at it, red or intensified pink. And so coming together in the organizations that you participate in right now, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you need to speak truth to power and speak about fighting voter suppression. Educate in the circles that you're in. So whether it's if you're a member of the Divine Nine, with your church, with your Jack and Jill chapter, with people in your neighborhood, because there are a whole bunch of, during the past presidential elections, people were not necessarily part of any structured organization. They just got together in their neighborhoods and said, look, we need to vote. These are the reasons why. This is what it means. And as lawyers, whether we want to be or not, we are leaders. Our communities look to us. Reach out to your other professional friends who can do the same thing. Join a grassroots organization. We have Transformative Justice Coalition that's getting in good trouble every single day. We've got some of the more traditional civil rights, human rights advocacy groups, voting rights advocacy groups like Rainbow Push Coalition. They're in most big cities, most communities, and you can reach them. You can reach the Action Network. You can reach the Urban League. You can reach the NAACP. If you are not familiar with those organizations, go to the organizations you're familiar with. We must support our young lawyers. And I'll tell you something about our young lawyers. They know how to take this phone and start a movement. When I can't figure something out, I ask my children, the young lawyers, and by the way, that's every day I can't figure out one of these technological things. And I think that we can reach out in the spaces that we're in. Go to schools. You can speak virtually to schools, to classrooms. Let's educate our 18-year-olds that are first-time voters. Don't think there's nothing you can do. There's literally something you can do. How about the law firms that you're in? Oh, yeah. Because we're working very hard, let me put it that way, in firms, in organizations that now have some type, we don't know how long it's going to last, but there's just a social justice awareness or awakening that may last a little longer. We need to take advantage of us and take the opportunity to educate people on the importance of what voter suppression means. It's so interesting how some people have never, ever seen, heard of, experienced voter suppression. Well, that's not us. We know what it is. But I bet your colleagues, if you're at a majority firm, don't really know what it is. Educate them on that. Pull them into your pro bono service. Every level. And let's say you're a solo practitioner, you don't have any colleagues. Well, you do have a community. You do have a community because you're trying to get clients. You're in the community every day. There's nothing more appealing for our community than them seeing lawyers out there in the forefront, because that reminds them of Thurgood Marshall. That reminds them of all the lawyers who marched alongside our leaders, our Dr. Kings, all of those. There were lawyers that were marching and getting folks out of jail. So if you take a position virtually or in person, helping your community, it's reminiscent of a time that people can appreciate, because we need to let them know that we are right back to those days when they were preventing us to vote. It's just a different way. That's why people call it Jim Crow 2, the renewed Jim Crow. So this is a moment in time where the National Bar can continue to assert itself as a change agent, and it starts with each one of us.
President Hoffler, you mentioned something that I want to lean in on with Attorney Lofton, and that is being able to use our devices. And, you know, technology is a beautiful thing. I think we've all seen the innovation of mobilization during COVID. We were able still to get out the vote while safely staying in. Attorney Lofton, as a young lawyer, as the communications chair, talk to us about the use of technology when you're talking about being advocates and being in this space, and how we can use communication and technology to advance our initiatives.
Sure, I'd love to do that. I think my first technology client practicing was Microsoft, and I got a chance to see some of their platforms and see some of the variety of ways that they could be utilized. And I think that the marriage between technology and activism is real. So, there's so many different ways to do it, whether or not it be GroupMe, whether or not it be through Facebook. We all have access to a ton more folks than we used to. You don't necessarily need to be in person. You can do activism virtually. So I think that, whether or not you have a Facebook group for your church group and you want to use that as an opportunity to do a panel, whether or not you want to use a Remo and you want to have something a little bit more high level and personalized, I think that using virtual platforms to educate your community is the best you can do in terms of this day and age activism. Grassroots constructionalism in the space of technology and activism is where things need to be going and keep going.
Can I add to that? Okay. I'm going to reference back to last year with Breonna's, when we were pushing for Breonna's law to be passed locally and working with some of the grassroots organizations, the technology that they have, they put it up on social media, they put the numbers out, people call. My friend, I have friends that are in the legislature. They said, look, I'm voting for this law. Will you tell them to take my number off of it? Because they had so many numbers and calls coming in and so we really do have to lean into some of our grassroots organizations that are doing those work, creating those platforms, using technology to the advantage, because I witnessed it hand in hand. When I got that phone, I thought it was just a call to see how I was doing. She said, please. And it was Sean King's, something that he had set up. She said, tell Sean King to take my number out. I am voting for the law. And I was like, okay, so it works.
And I want, and Lakila, I just wanted to let you know, there's some questions in the chat that I think that we should address from our members also. We should ask of the panel. Well, let me just read one. There's a question about a filibuster.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Again, I was looking for that microphone. So I apologize.
So the question is, even if the filibuster is eliminated, will this solve the problem? Manchin and Sinema will not vote with Democrats to pass the voting rights legislation. Excellent question. Who wants to tackle that? Lakila?
I'm actually gonna defer to our subject matter expert because I feel like when you have the benefit and the privilege to have a legislator on a panel with you, you let that person speak. So I'm going to go to Representative Driscoll, if you don't mind. I'm going to yield that my opportunity to you.
Chair Stemmons, thank you so much. I don't mind. And just one more point of personal privilege. I just have to tell you, back when I decided to run for office, actually was able to connect with Higher Heights at a training that the Collective PAC had for Black candidates. It was their first campaign school, and Higher Heights was just so very kind to me in sharing information and wisdom. So it truly is an honor to be on this panel with you today. So, the question, it's interesting. If the filibuster is eliminated, will it solve the problem? Let's take it one step at a time. First, eliminating the filibuster probably would actually help, right? Because what the filibuster is, as we all know, is it's just stopping the party with the gavel from being able to move their agenda forward. And even more so than just the party with the gavel, right? Like, this is actually what the people want. Like, they are sent there. We have the gavel as Democrats. The Democrats have the gavel because the people put them there, and they should be able to run with that and to pass the legislation that they want. And remembering that, of course, the courts and the judicial branch is the backstop if any of that legislation would cross constitutional lines, and that's regardless of which party is in control. But I think that the question really hits on an important point, which is disunity within the party. I would say that if it gets to the point where the filibuster is eliminated, then maybe Manchin and Sinema have to rethink that political calculus of what side of history they want to be on. But it raises a deeper concern for me, which is that we can't count as Black women, as the Black community, we cannot count on political parties to save us. That is why we have to be very well organized. We have to be committed. We have to be in deep relationship with one another. We have to be moving in the same direction and be very clear on our goals, because when we are well organized, that's when we have the power. That's when we can best push for and demand the accountability that we need from elected officials. I will tell you that as an elected official, there is nothing more that a politician fears than a voter who is informed, educated, and not afraid to use their vote. They need us, right? Like we have saved this democracy time and time again. It's something to be very grateful for and to not take for granted, but we have to be well organized, because you're right. Even if that filibuster gets eliminated, what then? We need this voting rights legislation. I'm afraid, probably like many of you, that we are in a process in America where we just might turn back the clock if we don't stay vigilant. And I feel like not on my watch, and probably not on your watch either. So thank you for the question.
I also wanted to, Lakila, before we go to the next panelist to speak, I just want to mention, and this, our member couldn't put this in the chat or couldn't access the chat. We just want to mention Justice Sherry Beasley and Val Demings as senatorial candidates. We want to call their names because we talked about how there are no Black women in the U.S. Senate, and that, after Senator Harris, relinquished her position and is now the vice president, that left a void. And of course, we were all upset about that. So we've got to speak their names, Justice Sherry Beasley and Congresswoman Val Demings, because they are running for the U.S. Senate. Okay, I'm sorry, Lakila. You're on mute.
Y'all, sorry about that. That was actually amazing, and that was a great segue to what I'm going to now turn to Attorney Cass Jackson and talk about. There was a question that just came up, and that is, how do we push for a Black female nominee on the Supreme Court? Attorney Cass Jackson, I know that while you may be in Florida, you are in constant communication with the powers that be on Capitol Hill and in the White House. How, as an organization and as Black lawyers, do we advocate for that to occur?
You're on mute, Yolanda.
There we go. First, I'd have to say, if I haven't learned anything about this season, is that you have to create your own narrative. Speak a thing, it will be a thing. Let your request be known. And I'm not going back to church, but it's true. So I think we start out by creating a narrative that we will have a Black woman on the Supreme Court. And then I think we have done some vetting already and identifying those persons that will be qualified, or those women that would be qualified to meet that. And then we support them. How do we support them? Lolita hit it right on the head. You talk about it, and you talk about it till they tell you to shut up. Just keep talking about the fact that we have to have a Black woman on the Supreme Court. Did I say we have to have a Black woman on the Supreme Court? Yes, I did say that we have to have a Black woman on the Supreme Court. And that's something that as Black women, we are used to being persistent and say it everywhere we go. In Florida, for example, we have 2 Republican senators. But they know that I say that we need to have a Black woman on the Supreme Court. So that's how you start. And we create the narrative, and we use organizations to write letters, social media, to make sure that those people who are the decision makers, because I imagine there'll be a nominating process. I sit right now on our federal nominating commission. And let me tell you something, when you have people on both sides of the aisle, you still have to make your request known. And did I say we need to have a Black woman on the Supreme Court? So that's how it works.
Can I add to what Yolanda's saying about how we need to have a Black woman on the Supreme Court? And did we mention that we need to have a Black woman on the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court? We mentioned it. We have already vetted some of the Black women that we need to have on the U.S. Supreme Court. So let me just be very clear. The National Bar Association, like our organization, has already vetted women, Black women, that we need to have on the U.S. Supreme Court.
And yes, we can say it again. We will have a Black woman on the United States Supreme Court. Let's touch and agree with that. And the Bar Association says amen. This has been a phenomenal panel. I am blessed and privileged to be able to serve alongside these amazing women. And President Hoffler, again, thank you for extending the opportunity to serve to all of us. And as we wrap up this phenomenal presidential showcase, I wanted to just say thank you to the Chief of Staff, Akua Kopik, who has been working tirelessly, not only on this convention, but this entire bar year. The leadership team and President C.K. Hoffler, were faced with something that was unprecedented. We were square dead in the middle of a pandemic, under the backdrop of one of the most important election cycles in our lifetime. And so I am going to turn it back over to President Hoffler for a recap and to close out. And I just want to say, we were just told there are over still 300 people watching this live. We started this 2 hours ago. So you all, thank you so much. That is a testament to President Hoffler, your leadership, and your ability to convene our members in a virtual space. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I believe the numbers could be closer to 500 because we had the YouTube and we had the
yes. Yeah. I apologize. Yes, I was just looking at one aspect. You are right. So again, yes. Shout out to you for being able to convene us not only on one medium, but multiple platforms and mediums to bring us all together.
Well, thank you for your kind comments. I want to just say this has been just an amazing year. We started out in 3 pandemics and we're ending in 3 pandemics. But the one thing that we did as a National Bar Association family, we joined our forces, came together, and we moved our agenda forward in an aggressive way, whether it was through our efforts at the White House, our efforts on a legislative level, meaning the U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate, or locally in different jurisdictions, coordinating with our warriors in the field, whether it was the Lawmakers Baker, the Ben Crump, the Chris Stewart, the Lee Merritt, the Darrell Parks, and all the countless other men and women of our organization that fight these fights every day, these fights of social justice against police brutality, voting, voter suppression. I mean, to have the extraordinary visionary leader, Fred Gray, who was Dr. King, Rosa Parks, and so many others, counsel to be part of a voter suppression litigation in Georgia was just a tribute to what we do at the National Bar Association. So we must continue that fight. I must thank Akua as well, Akua Kampa. She's just simply amazing. It's not just her work this year. It wasn't just her work last year. It was her work the year before. And she's given so much to the National Bar Association, but this year certainly has been remarkable. And Akua, we thank you. To our General Counsel, David Green, what you have to know is when we put together these panels and all of these relationships that we've built this year, I took the approach, we must protect the brand of the National Bar Association in every contract, every negotiation, every memorandum of understanding. And David Green and his incredibly talented team took leadership and took that very seriously. So I thank you. To the leadership of the National Bar Association, we've got Vice President Lawmakers Baker. We have our treasurer, Nick Austin. We have our vice presidents also that were very, and Lamont Bailey, very instrumental in mobilizing our groups, our teams, our sections and divisions, and our affiliates. I want to say thank you. To the members at large, I want to say thank you. But most importantly, to you, the members of the National Bar Association, thank you for allowing me to lead. This is our last presidential showcase. And so we just want to say thank you. I love the National Bar, and I'm always going to be here for the National Bar Association. Thank you.